Alright, so Marvel Spider-Man 2 keeps on delivering. We have even more amazing things you probably didn't know you could do in this game. Some massive future boss battles being hinted, possibly in DLCs or even in the sequel. And even more so, a Venom spin-off that Insomniac is now considering. The game has literally been breaking records left and right, so we're gonna talk about that and more in this video. But to start things off, I really like it when games just leave room for secret interactions that most of the players wouldn't even know about. And yeah, you can actually still ride bicycles around the city even outside of various missions. Of course, huge shout outs to Simon over on Twitter, as he was the one, well, the first one to actually share this. But you can find at least one bicycle right here in Astoria around these building blocks. There's going to be one right here by the fence. Now, normally if you get close to it, you're not even going to see a button prompt. However, you can still press triangle and Spidey will start riding it, which I think is really awesome. It's the only bike around the city that I found having this interaction. However, if you find any others, totally let me know down below. But it does work for at least a couple of building blocks around the spawning point at which is going to just despawn eventually as you move too far away. But really nice detail, and I kind of wish this was possible for every bike around the city. But moving on, if you haven't been paying attention, there is a really cool attention to detail, and that is that every suit now in the game will physically get deteriorated and even ruined as you just get more and more damaged, and you will see a lot of like blunt damage and slashes and even rips through the fabric of the suit. And what I find really interesting is that every single suit kind of has its own damage patterns, and if you go in very close with the camera, you will see that these are going to be very distinct. So suits that normally don't have armor, you will usually see rips through the seam, the skin will be partially exposed, and you will also see some of the fabric being stretched apart, which I find really interesting. However, in the case of the ones that do feature armor, like for example the anti-Ox suit, you will not see any skin beneath it, but actually the armor beneath the primary layer. And this is going to be dependent on the types of fabrics that are in conjunction with the armors. So for example, one of the pre-order ones, they do feature different rips on the fabric that is on top of the armor. But if you take a look at something like the spider armor, which features both armor and fabric, you're going to have different damage types on different parts of the body. Again, very cool attention to detail, but the only exception to this rule is obviously the symbiote suit. So every single symbiote suit in the game does not seem to get any damage at all, and for good reason. It's because it can constantly regenerate. I kind of only wish that it was animated similar to the comics, where if you got any damage on a body part, you would see the suit kind of just regenerating back. Another interesting detail is that spider arms can be completely different for different types of suits. So there are 6 of them in total, with one being very common, but there are a few options in there that have their own unique styles and also unique colors depending on the suit style. So one of them, for example, is the superior suit, which has its own style, the red and black one by default. But if you go with the different styles, like for example the blue one, it's also going to change the color with that. My favorite, of course, is the green as one of the suit styles for this. Definitely one of the most vibrant, and of course one of my favorite suits in the entire game, and I'm glad that it has its own style too. Then we have the spider armor, which just like in the previous game has its own variant with the golden colors. So this also kind of has these ringed textures around the middle joints. However, unlike the previous variant, this doesn't seem to change with the other styles, as they all kind of feature these golden patterns, so all of them will feature the golden spider arms too. The Iron Spider also has its own variant with the red and the golden accents, plus a bit of black over there in between some of the joints. But this is going to be the only variant, as this doesn't have any additional styles. Still looks very good, and again the same as in the previous games. Interestingly enough, the Into the Spider-Verse variant also features its own color of the spider arms, plus a bit extra stuff on the model. So you're going to see a few more extra spikes in there, but the color is fully black, and I think it goes really well with the suit. The default one would have just stood out of place. And then there's also the Kumo suit. This also features its own variant, which is kind of like the opposite of the default one. So it's a bit grayish with some red accents, and no changing to other styles doesn't seem to affect the coloring on that either. It's going to always be the same for either of the Kumo variants. And of course, the default variant, which is available for all of the other suits, this is going to be white with the blue accents. Plus, it features slightly subdued spikes over there at the joint level, but this depends, of course, on the angle and how much it bends. Yeah, it's going to be something that you will see most of the time. Now, if you go with either of the symbiote suits, you're going to get the spider dash and the spider jump modified tendrils. So this is going to replace the spider arms for these suits specifically, and every single, well, symbiote suit will have these tendrils instead. Now, similar to this, some of your web wings will also be slightly different depending on the suit that you pick. However, the most different is going to be obviously the secret war suit for Peter, as this is the only one that actually features a glider, or well, a couple of wings over there which kind of act like a glider instead of the usual web wings that you have around your arms. So this is going to also change in color depending on the suit style you pick for the civil suit. So this is either going to be white, but you also go with the camo, and there's the more vibrant cyan plus pink color that you can go with at some point. There's also the black symbiote variant that only goes with the black symbiote suit style. However, everything else and all the other suits, including the white symbiote one, will get the typical web wings for Peter. Miles will obviously have his two variants, either red or blue, but this is going to be suit dependent. Oh, and by the way, while we're on the subject, there's actually an extra suit that you didn't know about. Well, kinda not really. This is the mighty spider cube, and it's essentially a glitch. But you can easily trigger this by just going into the photo mode and then just repeatedly changing between the suits until you see the entire character completely breaking and this cube appearing instead of it. So this is going to persist until you completely reset the game, but now you can just swing around the city as the mighty spider cube while trying to stop crime as a cube, I guess. At some point, Insomniac has to release this as a fully fledged kind of suit, I guess. But speaking of Insomniac, yeah, whatever they do next is absolutely going to be stacked with villains, be it a sequel like Spider-Man 3 or just pure on DLCs. We have at least a couple more insane villains and bosses that have already been teased from various side activities. So if you haven't checked these yet, totally tune off and come back at a later date, as this is kind of falling into spoilers territory. So one of them is at the end of all the drone missions, you're going to eventually find a secret identity of a certain target that Kraven was hunting for. And what this brings you to is essentially the Chameleon's mansion. Here you will find out that over the decades he has acquired the identity of many targets, and it seems that Spider-Man is also in his visor, as we can see that one of his masks is actually inside of his secret lair. So what's cool about this is that this heavily implies that at some point he and the Chameleon is going to have a run-in, and we can see all the tech that he's been using to essentially morph his face into other people's faces, essentially going undetected and doing all the Soviet spy work that he's doing. I found him to be one of the most strangest villains in the entire Spider comic series, but definitely one that I want to see Insomniac exploring more. Even towards the end, we can hear his monologue in which he says, "I will do what you could not," so definitely implying that he is going to go on the hunt and trying to interfere with Spidey's life in one way or another. Another major villain is Carnage. This is something you find out about towards the end of the Flame side mission as you play with Yuri, well, Wraith in this case, but essentially towards the end you will find out who the Flame really is, which is Cassidy basically, and you will even see that his goal all along was to get his hands on one of those symbiotes. How he managed to find out where this gets transported is still a mystery, but he does get his hands on that symbiote, which eventually you will see that turns into that crimson color, very specific to Carnage. Plus, he mentions towards the end that there's judgment to be brought as well as Carnage. So definitely something that's going to be a big fight in whatever DLC or future sequel we get. And speaking of future installments, it seems that Insomniac hasn't completely put off the table a possible Venom spin-off, and in a recent interview with the game's narrative director, yeah, it seems that Insomniac is still open to that possibility and they really want to deliver what the fans really want, but they are still of course deciding upon it. However, I really wish they will decide upon it, because that one mission we had as a playable Venom was one of my favorites in the entire game and heavily reminds me of the Amazing Spider-Man from back in 2005, I believe. I mean, that Activision game was one of the only to explore Venom side too, so I do want to see a fully fledged game in which this character is featured. I think that he is big enough to be featured in this way. Plus, his abilities are absolutely monstrous. He's absolutely destroying everything, and the way he takes down enemies is one of the most brutal in this kind of like whole universe we've seen. Of course, not to say that Peter and Miles don't do it their own way, but yeah, he just has his own flair that I want to see more of. And of course, this comes in line with the fact that Spidey sold over 2.5 million copies in just the first 24 hours, pretty much propelling it the most successfully and sold game of any PlayStation games of all time, even completely exceeding the previous records broken by God of War Ragnarok and all the other Sony games before that. Clearly, Insomniac is on the right track, and plus we also have that teaser with the Green Goblin at the end of the post-credits. So this is another big villain that we should see, with Norman Osborn now kind of like wanting revenge for what happened to Harry, which he absolutely blames on the two Spideys. And we can also see that he is going to get Doc Ock back into business, so he's probably also going to be one of the villains that we should see, maybe in the DLC, but maybe even more so in the sequel. Whatever that's going to look like, I'm really excited for the Spider-Man future. Looks really awesome, and totally let me know down below what's the one villain that you do want to see in any future installments. Thanks much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.